Good evening. My name is Bob Burbidge. I am Chair of the Lexington Housing Assistance Board, commonly known as LexHab. Permit me to confirm that LexHab members participating in the presentation tonight. And as I call your name, would you just please confirm that you are here? Henry Liu,
I'm here.
Bill Kennedy.
I'm here.
Okay, these are the three panelists, and I see we have Tara Mizrahi from LexHab. Could you identify yourself, Tara?
Tara, we can't hear you.
Oh,
Yep. Just acknowledge that you're here and that you're LexHab, Tara.
Yeah, your microphone's not working.
can you guys hear me now?
Oh, yes.
Yes, we do.
Okay. This is Tara Mizrahi. Sorry, I had to take my earbuds out. It wasn't working.
Okay. So, and also when I call your name as panelist, please identify yourself. Architect Colin Smith from Colin Smith Architecture,
Yes.
and Brian Goudreau of Hancock Associates.
I'm here.
Okay. Let's see. I think we're ready to begin. So Henry, if you could get the presentation up. I should point out that, yes, that this meeting is being held on Wednesday, October 27th, and this is an open meeting of the Lexington Housing Assistance Board. We are still conducting these meetings in Zoom due to the ongoing pandemic. And I also see that Lester Savage has joined us. Les, good evening.
Good evening.
Okay. All right, Henry, I think we're ready to move forward.
Hey, great. So my name is Henry Liu. I am a LexHab board member, and my role tonight is to act as moderator to cover logistics so that everyone understands the virtual meeting format and controls. This meeting is being held as a Zoom webinar and is being simulcast live by LexMedia and recorded for future on-demand viewing. As a Zoom webinar, only panelists will be able to speak during the presentation. And please note that the Q&A text box will not be monitored or used as part of tonight's discussion. Once it is time for live Q&A, you may raise your Zoom hand in order to ask a question. We ask that you hold off raising your hand until you've heard a majority of the presentation. We're hopeful that the presentation will address questions that you may have. Hands raised before it's time for Q&A will be lowered. To raise your hand, please see the example screenshots. For a computer screen, what you see on the screen here is if you...
It's not showing, Henry.
It's not showing?
No.
That's strange. Hold on. Did I stop sharing?
There we go.
Can you see that now?
Yes, we
Okay.
can.
For the computer screen, what you see is the controls here. All you have to do is hover your mouse somewhere and you should get the navigation bar on the bottom. You click reactions and then click raise hand to raise your hand. For a tablet, just touch anywhere on the screen, and this is an iPad, but other tablets should be similar. You should get a navigation bar with 3 little dots that says more. If you click on that, you should see a menu of items, and you can see the raise hand somewhere in the menu there. For a smartphone, this is an iPhone as an example, but again, similar to the tablet, you touch somewhere on the screen to get the menu bar. Touch the more selection, and then that will open up the menu, and you should see the selection there to raise your hand. Once recognized, you will be unmuted and asked to state your full name and address, followed by your question or comment. Hands raised before it's time for Q&A will be lowered. We're not taking questions at this time. And thank you again for attending tonight's meeting. I now return the microphone back to LexHab Chair Bob Burbidge.
Well, thank you, Henry. As many of you know, LexHab has been in existence since 1983. We currently own 78 units throughout the town of Lexington that we manage, and our inventory consists of 1, 2, 3, and 4 bedroom units. We have a high demand for high handicapped accessible units. We need to provide at least 2 units per year to keep up with the town's inventory of affordable housing to keep it above the 10% threshold. And planning and construction of new units takes many years. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn the podium over now to Colin Smith, who will walk through the presentation, and would ask Brian DeGaudreau to chime in when it's appropriate. So Colin, take it away.
Great, thank you, Bob. So our site here is a 30,000 square foot area of land situated in the Vine Street neighborhood, which is comprised of 1 to 2.5 story homes. It was the former Leary property, which at one point in time contained a house and a barn. And if we can go to the next slide, Henry, please. In 2011, the Housing Task Force put forward a report, and this is a site plan diagram that was included in that report, which contained 5 to 6 dwelling units, 14 bedrooms, 2 garages, and represented about 5,000 square feet of lot area per dwelling unit, if that calculation is done using 6 dwelling units. And so I just wanted to include that here as a reference point that was done in the early stage of this project. So it's, Henry, if we can go to the next slide, please. I can show you what we had proposed last year, which was 3 buildings as shown on the previous plan, 16 parking spaces, and which we broke the buildings down into smaller footprints, smaller number of units than what was in that previous plan, striving for more of a New England farmhouse style structures arranged around a common green space. And since then, we've received feedback not only at the December 2020 meeting that we held via Zoom, but also in January 2021, earlier this year. And so from that feedback we received, we generated a new site plan, which you'll see on the next slide here, which is, oh, I'm sorry. So the changes that we did make, changes and reductions, is that we went from 3 buildings to 2 buildings, reduced the parking from 16 spaces to 10 spaces, which is the minimum zoning requirement. And we moved, with that reduction in parking spaces, we were able to move the parking further from Vine Street, and which in turn allows us to better screen it from Vine Street. And that also resulted in less impervious area. And then also, in an effort to reduce the number of trips moving up Vine Street, we've arranged the driveway in a form that would encourage traffic to move towards Woburn Street. And we're providing signs for a left turn only to allow that flow and encourage that flow to go towards Woburn Street. And so you'll see those changes here on the next slide, the site plan that shows 2 buildings, a smaller 2-story structure up front, which is at the bottom of your screen here, adjacent to Vine Street. You see the change in the geometry of the driveway with the left turn only. out of the site, 10 parking spaces situated at the rear of the property, and then a 4-unit structure located at the rear, which contains 4 dwelling units at the rear on two separate floors. That is a taller structure than the front building, so that's a 2.5-story structure. And again, that's the entire project encompasses 6 dwelling units, handicap dwelling unit in each building at grade, obviously. A total count of 14 beds, no garages. So again, down to 2 buildings versus 3 for 5,000 square feet of lot area per dwelling unit. And we've also increased the landscape screening between the street and the parking area primarily, but also some landscape plantings around the structures. We will, in the coming weeks, be meeting with Lexington Living Landscapes, local group, on consulting them for advice on the landscape plan in working with Brian's company there, Hancock Associates. So if we move on to the next slide, Henry. This is where I'll hand it over to Brian, who has, since the January meeting, has gotten pretty involved with analyzing the site, doing existing conditions and soil tests, and developing a stormwater management plan, but I'll let him speak to the specifics for you.
Thank you, Colin. Brian Goodrow with Hancock Associates. I'm the civil engineer on this project. What you see on the screen is an existing condition survey. So we went out there and located existing conditions. Topography generally slopes from Vine Street down towards the wetlands at the rear. The wetlands were flagged by professional wetland scientists, and they're represented on this plan. We've also, in the interim, conducted soil testing. So what we did is we went out there and we dug holes to understand what the underlying soil texture is, where groundwater is at, and if there were any subsurface site constraints. And all of that is a part of our baseline for our stormwater management analysis. When we dug tests, we found loamy sand to sand, so very well-drained soils, and we did not find any indication of groundwater. So groundwater is greater than 10 feet across the site. So very, very suitable soils for stormwater management, which upon earlier revisions or conceptual plans, we had anticipated putting underground chambers beneath the parking lot to treat, attenuate, and mitigate stormwater runoff, and that's the offset of changing what's currently vegetated areas to pavement and roofs and walkways and manicured lawn. Henry, if you could shift to, I think the next slide is our layout. And this is our layout plan, very, very similar to what Colin was showing, just a little bit more geometry on it. So actual property lines, parking lot dimensions, the 10 parking spaces, 2 buildings, open space reserved kind of in the center. And just to circle back to the stormwater management piece, that's going to be located underneath the parking lot. So roof runoff will be conveyed by roof leaders into the underground chambers. The parking lot itself will go through a series of catch basins into that underground system where, again, it will be treated for TSS according to all local stormwater regulations, as well as our requirements under the state standard, the Wetlands Protection Act. The ultimate point of discharge is going to mirror existing conditions. If you recall, Vine Street shifts or slopes topographically down towards the rear, which is the top right corner of your property. Our point of discharge is going to be there. And again, our entire stormwater management approach and intent is to mimic our existing conditions out there. With that, that's a pretty high level kind of overview of our approach to the site. I'll turn it back over to Colin.
Thanks, Brian. Henry, if we proceed to the next slide, you'll see a diagram here that shows the infiltration that Brian was just mentioning under the parking lot area here. So that's on the left side of your screen in a hatch. I don't know, Henry, maybe if you can use your mouse pointer just to identify that long linear infiltrator there, right, which collects stormwater from the buildings and the parking lot and retains that and then allows that to percolate back into the ground. And this shows the darker curved lines here show the new grading patterns versus the existing conditions are the dashed lines. So there's a little bit of regrading going on as a result of the structures and the parking lot as well to allow for all this drainage system to work properly. And moving on to the next slide, we reached out to the Lexington Police Department to help us with collecting some traffic information on the existing conditions. That was done this past June. And the data is below at the bottom of the page here, but we just wanted to present their findings that the speeds are well below the unposted 25-mile-an-hour limit. Volume is about 70 total trips both ways a day. And that Michael McLean, the interim police chief, attributes that to lower volumes due to COVID and lack of morning commuters. I think Les Savage, you may have had some communication with him. I don't know if you had anything else to add to that.
No, it's pretty evident. He said, he could do another study if necessary, but doesn't feel as though we're going to see a great change.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And moving on to the next slide, as we've worked hard in the past on LexHab projects, and they've got a great track record of developing near net zero homes and sustainable design practices, not only with the building but the landscape as well. So we're very much interested in using native species and working not only with the Conservation Commission, but Lexington Living Landscapes on how we can develop this parcel of land and have it blend in with not only the surrounding neighborhood, but adjacent conservation lands as well. And we're committed to installing solar panels, installing more than the code minimum required insulation, higher performance windows, low flow plumbing fixtures, and Energy Star appliances. So, across the board, we're committed to making improvements that represent good sustainable practices in architecture and landscape design. And if, Henry, we can move on to the next slide. I just want to talk a little bit briefly about next steps in terms of the schedule. And then I have some graphics to show you, show everyone what the project looks like as it's coming together in a computer model. So this fall, we're requesting from town meeting funds for construction documents, which would be civil engineering, architectural design, structural engineering, and such that would allow the project to be put out for bid. And then later this year, we've got a state review, DHCD, and then we're also anticipating Conservation Commission reviews later this year, which is, in the next month or two. And then early next year, our ZBA review. And then spring town meeting requests for construction funds with anticipated construction start in the summer or fall of next year. Okay. And this is a view that shows the what I'll call the farmhouse, the old farmhouse up along Vine Street, which is a 1.5 story L joined to a 2-story home. And so the gray building there is adjacent to Vine Street, contains 2 dwelling units. The one closer to the driveway and parking area would represent the handicap dwelling. And then the larger structure in the back, which we're representing as a barn, contains 4 units, again, with the lower level unit adjacent to the parking, serving as the handicap dwelling unit. With so 2 dwelling units on the ground floor, on the barn, with 2 dwelling units on the second floor of the barn structure. And the next slide shows us as you approach up from Woburn Street, you see the farmhouse out front, the 1.5 story joined to the 2-story structure. So these 2 dwelling units exist on 2 floors. So they each have their own stairs within them. And here you can see that this building screens most of the building behind it from this view. And I think we'll see that on the next view. So we've put this into the computer model based on Brian's existing conditions and proposed grading. And we've developed some views here for everyone to see what it looks like from different vantage points. So the next slide, Henry, we'll see a more frontal view. Again, hiding the structure behind it is one of our design strategies for how to lay this out on the site. And then just moving through the slides, Henry. Again, at the approach drive, you begin to see the structure at the rear. And the next slide shows the common green space between the buildings. So this is as if you were walking from the parking area to each unit. And the next slide, a view of the green from the other end back towards the parking area. And in the background there, you'll see we've got a place for bikes and an enclosure for trash and recycle. In the next slide, I think this is our last image, which is similar to the first one that I'd shown you. So I'll leave it at that and turn it back to you, Bob.
Well, thank you, Colin, and thank you, Brian, as well, for walking us through that. Clearly, there's been some changes made from the last time we gathered as a group, and would be very interested to hear what folks that live in the neighborhood or other folks in Lexington who are interested in affordable housing and the proposed development here on Vine Street. So, Henry, I'll let you take it from here. If people want to ask questions, let's move forward.
Sure thing. Yeah, it's now time for live Q&A. Again, once you're recognized and unmuted, please state your full name and address, and then your question or comment. And due to the limited time, please pay attention to other questions and comments to avoid asking the same question as someone else. And you can lower your own hand if your question was addressed. Zoom will automatically keep track of when you raise your hand. So there is actually a virtual line. Our first question is from Ruth Ladd. Ruth, go ahead.
She's on mute.
My apologies. I thought I had unmuted myself. This is Ruth Ladd, Pine Knoll Road. and I have a couple questions. First a comment, and that is, I really like the design. I think it's very attractive. But okay, a couple questions. One is in the back right corner, it looks like there might be a retaining wall. Is that the plan?
Yes.
How high is it going to be?
The height on that wall is 2 to 6 feet, somewhere in that neighborhood. So the barn is set at a basement elevation, and if you think about the back side of the barn on that right-hand corner as being more of a walkout, even though it's really not, we're trying to make a grade up of that basement elevation to be able to give the first 4 units patio space. So 2 to 6 feet or so.
Okay, because I could see it looked like it was a pretty good drop off, and so I assume there'll have to be some sort of a fence at the top.
Yep.
Okay. And what are traditional New England agricultural plantings? What does that mean?
I'm not sure I used the term agricultural. I mentioned more of a New England farmhouse language for the buildings, but to use native species of plants for the landscape design.
Okay, because it said native species, and then I quoted traditional New England agricultural plantings, and I thought, what the heck is that? Are we going to have rows of corn or what?
Oh, no, maybe, I don't have the slide in front of me, but it may have said architectural style versus agricultural, but yes, that wasn't the intent. I'm sorry.
Not a problem. Okay, thank you.
You're muted, Henry.
Sorry, there's ambient noise, I'm muted. The next question is from Michael and Susan Epling. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Hi, yes, this is Michael Epling, 15 Manley Court, and speaking for my wife, Susan. First of all, I think some of these changes are to be commended, such as the decreasing the impervious area, the increased screening of the parking area, left-hand only turn onto directing traffic towards Woburn Street. But to me, I think the overarching takeaway that I don't think should be lost here is that the position of the neighborhood for many years, I mean, I think we're talking over a decade now, is that the neighborhood has not been opposed to the construction of affordable housing on the lot, but they've been concerned with the density, specifically the number of units. And the number of proposed units remains at 6. So this, to me, this is shows a complete unwillingness of LexHab to compromise and to listen to the neighborhood's key concerns. So yes, I mean, I think there's some improvements in the design and attempts to mitigate the visual impacts of the design, but the neighborhood's concerns have been, I think, essentially ignored. Also, that said, I noticed that you decreased the number of parking spaces from 16 to 10, which at its face is commendable. But if I was one of the abutters on Lower Vine Street, where the street does widen somewhat, I'd be concerned about the ability of people to park on Vine Street between the entrance to the new units and Woburn Streets. And I was wondering if that has been whether that would be limited in any way above and beyond the current parking restrictions that take place in the wintertime.
Well, thank you for your question, Michael. I will start off by saying that with respect to the 6 units, we have to weigh the interests of the neighborhood plus the needs of the town and the incredible demand for low-income housing. So I think the changes that we made and those that you commended actually, I think would lend itself to creating a development that is perhaps smaller than it looks when you consider there are 6 units there. That would be my comment. I'd ask any other board member to please weigh in on Michael's concern about parking or other questions that he had.
Sure. I would like to point out that the number of bedrooms has gone down, Michael. So the number of units has remained the same, but we've dropped the number of bedrooms, which cuts traffic and density. The number of parking space drop was a response to what we thought was a neighborhood request. So we would increase the number of parking spaces. Myself, I would prefer to have more because I do have some concerns about parking along the street. So I'm glad you pointed that out. And I think we tried to listen to the neighborhood the first time. If the neighborhood would allow more or thinks more is better, then we're open to that.
Yeah, and Les, I'll just add, my recollection was that the police chief was on one of our calls, our prior Zoom meetings with the neighbors in other community people, but that they didn't want to encourage street parking, like you say, right? So to be able to accommodate more parking on the site was certainly a good idea. But you're right, we did reduce it to at least the zoning minimum, probably below our comfort level. At the December 2020 presentation, we had 16 beds, just to quantify it. So we reduced it by 2 beds.
Well, we have people already on who park on our place.
Yeah, I'd rather see it in the parking lot.
Our next question is from Wendy Barrett. Wendy, go ahead and unmute and provide your address and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Wendy Barrett, and I actually live on Concord Ave, but I'm asking a question for my parents who own 132 Vine Street. And I'm just wondering how the board came to the conclusion to do a development on this wonderful little street that, my best friend grew up there, and there is no place to park on the street. In the wintertime, cars have to decide who's going up and who's going down. It's 13 acres of conservation on Adams Street. There's 33 acres of conservation, and you could build your units over there to your heart's content without worry about traffic, walking distance to the public schools. I'm just curious as to why this development came up in a very tiny little community. And there are 2 beautiful units that came up on East Lexington by the Arlington Reservoir that blend in very nicely. I don't know how many beds they have, but let's face it, you reduce things by 2 beds, you're talking about fewer children. Children don't drive. The cars are all going to come from the adults. So how did it come to the decision that this development would come to Vine Street, where the road is so tiny and narrow and lovely?
Leslie, you want to talk about the history?
Town meeting bought that land from the Archdiocese. When the town meeting purchased it, they set aside a certain amount for conservation and they set aside a certain amount for housing, affordable housing. That's how it came to be. When, as you spoke of Adams Street. That was bought back in the 60s or the 70s. The Chiesa farmland is set up as conservation. There was never anything set aside. In order to change conservation to housing, it takes an act of town meeting.
Do it.
So I don't think you'll see that happen.
Well, how do we start that? I just think another option should be looked at. You're telling us that you're looking for more low-income housing. It was my understanding that Lexington is offering already a lot more low-income housing than a lot of our neighboring towns. My parents own the two-family there, and you know, they have done low-income in the past, in present, and probably future. Lexington is not opposed to low-income housing, but you're putting too much into a very tiny area when, if it takes a town meeting to open up some of that 33 acres, do it. It's on a main thoroughfare.
I think that is perhaps a discussion for another time. Your points are well made, Wendy, but we're in a position here where we have to keep up with population growth. And it isn't like we can stop and start, and you know, we need to move forward. And
right, but it's also stewardship, and this is a bad stewardship for our town to crowd that lovely little neighborhood when there are other open spaces.
I would just like to add that the Lowell Street development that was done by LexHab was 6 units on 20,000 square feet of land. Whereas this is 6 units on 30,000 square feet of land.
On a street.
And I also want to just reference the task force that was put together 10 years ago by the town to investigate the Leary property. So, you know, it's not LexHab saying, oh, let's just do this. It was the town that actually put together a task force and came up with this report over 10 years ago. So this has been, you know, a long time in development. This, you know, I think it's still posted on the town archive somewhere.
Well, just the armchair view is that the Adams neighborhood would not have it. So, and you know, Vine Street is descended from Irish immigrants. There you go, full stop.
Speeches, man. You're speechless.
Henry, you're muted.
Our next question is from Wei Lu. Go ahead and unmute and provide your street address and ask your question.
Yeah, this is Wei Lu from 81 Vine Street. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So actually, most people focus on the traffic of the Vine Street. I would like to say the Manley Street is also as important. The Manley Street is the only street the truck can drive in. So I have lived in this house for several months, and since I'm the new resident here. So in my impression, I feel this place is good, and the neighborhood is very friendly. But you know, the density is already pretty high. I worry that if you put 6 units more, the traffic will be terrible. And I see a lot of kids playing on Vine Street and Manley Street. I do have safety concern. And you know, the Manley Street currently people can freely park their cars there. If you add 6 units more, they may also park their cars on Manley Street. Then I think it will become terrible, and no truck can get in. You know, sometimes the truck getting in, they need to take care of the falling trees on the Vine Street, and that's essential. So I raise this concern. Thank you.
Great. Right now we have no raised hands. I don't know if anybody has any more comments or questions from the audience. Oh yeah, we have a couple more here. Michael Epling, go ahead.
Yes, Michael Epling, once again, 15 Manley Court. Just a quick follow-up. I mean, I haven't really thought too carefully about the impact of the reduction of parking spaces on the site from 16 to 10 and its potential impacts on parking on Vine Street as well as Manley Court. So yeah, I'd like to second the previous caller's comment about, again, we live on Manley Court, about we have seen already an increase of parking on Manley Court, and some of that increase in parking is from residents on Vine Street. So I would also have a concern that there'd be a parking overflow onto Manley Court. I can't speak for the neighborhood, and I forget exactly what was said in previous meetings about number of parking spaces on the new proposed site. But my personal preference would be to have, well, in addition to having fewer units, of course, would be to make sure that there's enough parking to accommodate the expected number of cars of residents of the new site, to have enough parking spaces on that site. But that said, I think some thought should be given to how to further restrict parking on both Vine Street and Manley Court. Just again, off the top of my head, maybe one of the restrictions could be to extend the overnight parking year-round on both Manley Court and Vine Street. And I mean, there may be other very simple proposals that could help prevent the kind of overflow parking that I think in all likelihood is probably going to occur.
Michael, that's a good idea. I don't know if it can be done. So we'll check into that. I do wonder what you would think is, so we had 16 parking spots at one point. What is your opinion as to somewhere between 10 and 16 that is better? Quantify it if you would.
I think you're still live.
Am I still live?
You are.
Yes.
Yes. So to quantify it, you're talking 6 building units. I think it's very typical now for people to have a minimum of 2 cars, often 3, particularly if they have a teenage son or daughter. So I would say for starters, 12 instead of 10, maybe 13.
Okay.
And I don't, again, speaking totally off the top of my head, probably the answer to what I'm about to suggest is no, but I'm wondering whether there's a way to restrict the number of cars that people own who live in these units.
Well, if I can comment on that, I think that's kind of, I mean, if you remember the population that we serve, it's unlikely that they have as many cars as you're anticipating.
I would tend to disagree, but that's just based on
we could look at, I don't know if we can look at Farmview as an example. There's 6 units there. How many cars are in that parking lot?
We have 10 spaces less, right?
Yeah, there are 10 spaces there.
Mhm.
And has there been overflow? Have there been issues? Have there been more than 1 or 2, more than 2 cars per unit?
None that I'm aware of.
No, we haven't been made aware of any of that.
Yeah. No, I do think the economics limit vehicles. So.
Well, if you feel that it's not an issue and the economics limit it, then I think there'd be no harm. And then also, as a condition of lease, limiting the number of vehicles that tenants can own, number of registered vehicles.
We'll look into that.
Thank you.
And I did just, having not responded completely to Wendy Barrett and your question bringing to mind, the children do bring a lot of car trips. Having had 3 kids of my own and trucking them around to various sporting events and that sort of thing, children do bring trips. And that's one reason to limit the number of bedrooms.
All right, the next hand raise is from Nancy. Nancy, if you could identify yourself and your street and ask your question.
Yes, hi, it's Nancy Corcoran Ronchetti, and I just would like to say that I agree with the previous person that there needs to be we need to look at the potential impact of all of this information. And I would just like to say that I appreciate all of the information that we've received, but I'm also always looking forward to new information that will help us identify what it is we really need to do. Thank you.
Henry, I believe
Matthew Barrett. Oh, hold on.
I think I noticed there was some other folks that had raised their hand that hadn't spoken a first time. I don't know if they're still there, but I know Betsy Weiss had raised her hand. And I thought we might want to make sure everyone gets to speak at least once.
So I'm not lowering anybody's hand until I promote them, but Matthew Barrett I tried to allow you to talk, but I'm getting a message that you're using an older version of Zoom. So if you would like to use the Q&A box and ask your question, feel free to do that, and I will repeat it for the panel to answer. So Matthew Barrett, if you want to use the Q&A box to type your comment or question, I can repeat it to the panel. But other than that, I don't see any other hands raised. Let's see whether or not that question comes through. So I just, while we're waiting, just sort of revisiting the car and the parking thing. I'm sure we could probably look historically, even at our current enrollment of tenants that we serve, and find out, you know, from that, how many, you know, on average, how many cars. I would be surprised if it was more than 2. You know, I think most of our tenants have 1 or 2 cars.
I think we could take we could take the statistics from Fairview and from Farmview both.
Right. And some of the others. I mean, we have other properties too, even houses. You know, I'm just curious, you know, what is the average?
Yeah, that's true.
What is the average?
Right.
You know, and then that may give us a little more comfort that, you know, maybe we don't have to place a restriction. It's just, you know, again, I think the economics of the population that we serve, it's unlikely to have, you know, more than 2 cars anyway.
Right.
But okay, there is. So Betsy Weiss is saying her hand is raised, but it's not. But I will go ahead, Betsy, if you want to talk.
Thank you. Yeah, this happened last time my hand was raised, and Melinda Walker had to text you. But anyways, a couple of things. To respond to Wendy Barrett, to change, once land has been designated for conservation, you have to go to the state to change it. And that's why when the town is buying land, it's really important, if there's a set aside for conservation, if there's any other town purpose, it needs to be carved off during the initial land acquisition purchase. And so I was on CPC actually in 2009. This is the last piece of land that is for affordable housing. It's 30,000 square feet out of, I'm not sure, is it 12 to 14 acres? And there was a farmhouse here, and this makes complete sense to have affordable housing here. And I want to say to Colin Smith, this is gorgeous. The farmhouse and the barn, I was also on the 2011 task force. This is exactly what we recommended, a farmhouse and a barn, something that was already there, and that's what you've done. And the fact that you've actually cited the farmhouse to block the barn, which originally you could view, is terrific. There are 2 large houses across the street, so I think the density of these 2 structures is terrific. I would also like to say that I believe, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, when the 6 BUSA, the 6 Farm View units on Lowell Street were in a lottery, there were 176 applicants for 6 units. So there is a real need for affordable housing. And this is the last piece of affordable land for affordable housing, unless the town buys more or LexHab. So there's a real need, and there's waiting lists at Lexington Housing Authority, at LexHab, and I think you've done a terrific job, and I want to say thank you. And if people want to change conservation, I'm all in support of that, but you've got to go to the state, and it's a complicated process. So there's an incredible need for affordable housing, and thank you. Also, when I was on the task force, we originally recommended 6 to 8 units, and then we reduced it to 6. So I was in March of 2011, it was up to 8, and then the final report was 6. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Betsy, for that background. We do have a hand raised from Nancy.
I don't think I think I'm all set. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I will lower
Thank
your
you.
hand then. All right, thank you. Betsy, did you have something else you wanted to say, or did I forget to lower your hand?
I lowered my hand. Thank you.
Oh, okay. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, so we do have the question from Matthew Barrett. Thank you for typing it in the Q&A. I will relay it to the panel. It says, none of your old studies seem to account for our Amazon delivery economy. Delivery trucks can't make it around the most areas of Vine Street as it is. So you're not taking into consideration the increased traffic from potentially 12 to 14 individuals in their Amazon type deliveries. You need to reduce the number of units to 4.
Do we have any other folks that have any comments or questions or suggestions that they'd like to make? I'll ask the panel, is there anything else that we would like to add? And I would ask, Colin and Brian to weigh in if there's something you think we might have missed along the way.
No, thank you.
Okay. Well, given that this is a public meeting, we will have to vote to adjourn the meeting. So I'd ask if you could, Henry, is Tara still a panelist or still there? If you could, there we go. We'll have to, I'd accept a motion to adjourn this meeting.
I'll move.
And we have a second. Thank you. I will do a roll call vote. I will vote yes to adjourn. Bill Kennedy,
Yes.
Henry Liu,
Yes.
Lester Savage,
Yes.
and Tara Mizrahi.
Yes.
Thank you. This meeting is adjourned, and we thank all of you for your input and your time. Thank you.